Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Shalini Suryanarayan from the Department of Sociology at Hindu College, University of Delhi. Today we are going to discuss about the module, the school and the university from the paper Education and Society. So students, let us see what we are going to learn in this module. This module serves to provide an understanding of the historical background, perspectives and concepts of school and university as institutions of learning. I quote Abraham Lincoln, who says, "The philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of the government in the next." We can never undermine the importance of schooling indeed. And according to Jawaharlal Nehru, a very often repeated quote of his, "The university stands for humanism and tolerance, for reason, for adventure of ideas, and for the search for truth. It stands for the forward march of the human race towards even higher objectives. If universities discharge their duties adequately, then it is well with the nation and the people." All of us are aware of the existence of schools, colleges, and universities. Some of us indeed have been privileged to spend a significant portion of our lives gaining education within the haloed precincts of schools and universities. And yet, how often is it that we stop to ponder and ask ourselves, what is a school? What constitutes the essence of schooling? How is the university different from the school? How do these institutions relate with society? Perhaps not so often. The beauty of organized social life is such that we tend to take many aspects of social organization for granted. However, this is where the sociologist steps in. Sociologists specifically study the ways in which institutions and processes are organized within society and how they relate with one another. In this module, you will learn about one of the most fundamental institutions of organized education, the school and the university. What is a school? A school is an institution designed for the teaching of students or pupils under the direction of teachers. Most societies have at least some system of formal education, which is commonly compulsory, and it is administered wholly or partly through state intervention. The use of the term school varies by country, as do the names of the various levels of education within the country's educational system. There are also several categories among schools themselves based on the source of funding, level up to which they impart education, and the medium of instruction, whether it houses boarders or students are day scholars, etc. However, in this module, our principal focus is on the understanding of the concept of school as an institution in its most basic and general sense, and placing it in perspective sociologically. The school can be understood sociologically at two levels. At the micro level, the school itself becomes the object of study. It can be understood as a social system with its own unique culture and values. It is characterized by the division of labor and patterns of interaction, a system of stratification and power relations. At the macro level, one looks at the patterns of interaction between the school and the community, including the state, the parents, students, and other stakeholders. Members of the school also have simultaneous occupation of other social groups. At the wider level of analysis, a school can be regarded as a part of the wider network of the school system and the social matrix in general. Schools, as we know and understand, did not always exist in society. These are the products of modernization. One of the earliest accounts of the school is found in a collection of lectures by Dewey brought out in 1899. Called The School and Society, this book generated considerable interest in the role of the school as a social institution and its contribution to the community. In 1968, Martin Shipman's Sociology of the School presented various perspectives on the school. In the early 20th century, educational sociology had started being taught as a distinct subdiscipline and the discourse on schools and schooling occupied a central place within it. The school is not merely a physical construction, it is also an ideological one. Each participant in school life, teacher and student, also constructs his own reality about the school. So a school is not just a social institution, it is a constructed one out of the meanings that the participants endow it with. The school has certain external social linkages, such as with the state and society, and a very real internal dynamics of its own. Often, it is the state that intervenes to constitute and standardize the curriculum that is to be taught and to ensure uniformity in the manner in which students are to be graded. Both sets of processes are real and, while being mutually discrete, are also intertwined with one another. Society also has certain expectations from schools in general and certain specific schools in particular. Objectives of schooling. The principal objective of schooling is, of course, the most obvious one: to impart education. In addition, schools also socialize the individual into the norms and values of a given society. In that sense, they act as instruments of transmission of cultural heritage. They are also the basic ground for the genesis of ideas and play a role in the transformation of culture. Schools help shape an individual into all that is considered desirable in a given society. They also provide suitably educated manpower for society to occupy the labor force. The need for the school as the agency of socialization is also there. The school is by far the only agency of modern society that can fulfill the above functions. Despite criticisms of the school system, it continues as it is a necessity of society. Socialization is one of the most important functions of schools. According to American sociologist Talcott Parsons, after primary socialization within the family, it is the school which takes over as the socializing agency. The school becomes a bridge between the family and the society as a whole and prepares the child for social life. The transition from ascribed to achieved statuses and particularistic to universalistic standards of evaluation are facilitated by the school. The school, for the student, represents the society in a microcosm, and the process of schooling trains children into the rules of their social world. Ideas about the school. Ideas about the school have stemmed from two main theoretical sources: the functionalist perspective and the Marxian analysis of indoctrination and repression. The functionalist perspective. The functionalist perspective views education as one of the important institutions of society, indeed, as a prerequisite for the existence of a social system. Functionalists view the school as a system and an essential component of the educational system as well as the social system. Sociologist Emile Durkheim, in particular, has given an outstanding treatise on the role of education and schooling. Durkheim lays special emphasis on the socializing role of the school. Drawing upon the organic analogy, Durkheim perceives the school as a vital organ in the social system. The school maintains continuity and at the same time is the agency from which new and emerging currents of change emanate. Since the school has the task of preserving the culture, in addition to imparting knowledge, enforcement of discipline becomes an important component of schooling. Critics of this kind of perspective point out that the school becomes a medium of indoctrination, and in the name of transmission of culture, it actually returns individuals trained to conform and comply. The Marxist approach. For Marxists, on the other hand, the hierarchical nature of both the structure and process of schooling transmits a culture of subordination and hierarchy that are essential to turn out workers, managers, and bureaucrats of the future. Therefore, it is the form of schooling, not its content, that is all important. According to Marxists, subordination and control were the original and explicitly stated functions of schooling, but they have become hidden in recent years behind an official educational ideology of equal opportunity and meritocracy. Consequently, this perspective has its starting point the political nature of schooling and questions in whose interest the system works. According to Bowles and Gintis, for instance, schools act to furnish the economy with a labor force provided with the appropriate skills, personalities, and attitudes. Schools are involved in the production of a submissive, obedient, and disciplined workforce. This, according to them, is the hidden function of schooling because it is contrary to the professed ideology of schooling, in which the school is viewed as a device to promote social reform and social mobility. The hidden curriculum, for them, operates through a correspondence between the structure of schooling and the economic system. The nature of work and social relations fostered in the educational system mirror those in capitalist society. For example, students have to obey orders, they have no control over their curriculum, and as such, gain little intrinsic satisfaction from school work. According to Bowles and Gintis, these conditions mirror students' future positions in the workforce, as there too, the worker has no control over work and experiences little intrinsic satisfaction. The school becomes a mechanism for the reproduction of the existing social relations of production. Symbolic Interactionism. In symbolic interactionist perspective, the theorists give primacy to the nature of the interactions in a social setting. This perspective suggests the idea that the reality of the classroom is a negotiated reality between students and teachers, constituted of the curriculum and the classroom as the site for interaction. Through Erving Goffman's dramaturgical approach, the school can be seen as a stage where students and teachers present themselves in prescribed manners, negotiating their daily worlds to ensure that performance disruptions do not occur. Students who perform best are rewarded, while underperformers are coaxed into conformity. Sociologist Erving Goffman's framework of the total institution is also useful for understanding the school, especially the boarding school. In a total institution, inmates lead enclosed, formally administered lives. There is a prescribed pattern and a privilege system designed to reward those who conform. Inmates are viewed in opposition to the staff. The staff form a separate and superior category. Inmates are raw material of the routine work of the staff, and arrangements are made to administer them efficiently. We can thus see that it is possible to see aspects of total institutions in schools, from the organization of the curriculum and the transaction of it, through the academic calendar and the timetable, to the symbolic barriers of the playground and the classroom. Alternatives to the school. There are various specific case studies and theories on pedagogy and schooling that can be accommodated within the above-mentioned three broad frameworks. Some of these question more deeply the merits of the existing school system and pedagogic practices. Most influential among such theorists are Ivan Illich and Paulo Freire. According to Ivan Illich, education should provide the opportunity for an individual to explore one's potential and to use initiative and judgment to develop one's faculties and talents to the fullest. Or, alternately, at the very basic, education is to do with the acquisition of certain specific socially useful skills, such as a language or a craft. According to Illich, schools as they exist and function today are ill-equipped to achieve these goals. For Illich, the existing format of school education itself is self-defeating in nature. For Illich, real learning would entail involvement of the student in every aspect of the learning process. Illich argues that in the present educational system, students have little say in the decision-making with regard to their own education. Their involvement is limited to compliance with the norms and standards. Illich therefore sees schools as repressive institutions that stifle creative expression, instill conformity, and crush pupils into accepting the interests of the powerful and believing these to be just. Expressing disappointment at this restrictive nature of institutionalized education, Illich calls for what he calls deschooling, making a case for an alternative system of self-directed education supported by voluntary social relationships and conducted through fluid informal arrangements. Paulo Freire, in his seminal work Pedagogy of the Oppressed, proposes a pedagogic paradigm with a new relationship between teacher, student, and society. Dedicated to the underprivileged or the oppressed, and based on his own experiences while helping Brazilian adults to read and write, the work encloses a detailed Marxist class analysis in its exploration of the relationship between the teacher and the taught. Freire criticizes the traditional educational paradigm that, according to him, domesticates people and calls instead for a liberating education. As Freire puts it, education for domestication tames and conditions people into resigning to their lot in life. Libertarian education, on the other hand, gives people self-confidence and a sense of being able to choose their own destiny. For education, therefore, Freire calls for a dialogic exchange between teachers and students, where both learn, both question, both reflect, and both participate in the creation of meaning. In conventional patterns of schooling, teachers engage in a monologue which is inflicted upon the students. There is an essential asymmetry and one-sidedness in the teacher-taught relationship, where the teacher doles out knowledge to the student, who is to be appropriately grateful for this benevolence. Freire questions this paradigm and suggests a relationship of mutual give and take between the teacher and the taught. Concretely, this pedagogy begins with the teacher mingling among the community, asking questions of the people and learning about their day-to-day lives in order to assess their pedagogic requirements. Through an understanding of people's conceptions, the teacher learns to appreciate the social reality of the students and to use this knowledge to reformulate the nature and content of classroom interaction through a set of ideas that those students can actually relate to. Freire rejects what he calls the banking model that conventional pedagogy follows, wherein students are regarded as empty vessels to be filled with information. The analogy of a child's piggy bank is useful to illustrate the nature of prevalent educational practices. According to Freire, the student in the traditional model of education is treated like a piggy bank, an inert receptacle to be filled with knowledge. He coined the phrase banking education, alluding to an educational system where learners are passive recipients of knowledge that is pre-selected for them to be deposited into their minds as if the mind were to be a bank for information. According to Freire, this banking concept of education reinforces the power of the oppressor. Knowledge is regarded as a gift to be bestowed by those who consider themselves knowledgeable upon those who are considered ignorant. The consequence of this is an experience of education where students are socialized to accept the passive role the system imposes on them, and thereby also they ascribe social statuses. Students are taught to adapt to the world as it is and to the fragmented view of reality deposited by the teacher, who becomes a de facto oppressor. According to Freire, in this manner, we prevent the rise of free-thinking individuals who would strive to enhance and surpass the aspirations of those great leaders who have fought for equality and for the end of oppression. You will be able to learn more in detail about the views of these theorists in other lessons in this course. The main idea that we must appreciate at this point is that the school and the university, especially the former, do often appear to function as autocratic, unidirectional structures of command. And yet, there is no effective alternative mechanism for systematically and consistently imparting and administering knowledge to a vastly populated, heterogeneous society. Moreover, ever since the inception of democracy and democratic social institutions, as well as the steady emergence of a civil society, there have been significant strides in school reforms. Punishments have been made less painful, rules are more student-friendly, and a system of continued interaction between teachers and parents and other stakeholders is in place. Even so, ideas on egalitarian, liberating systems of education remain welcome to act as guiding lights to reform the education system, rendering it suitable to the times we live in and sensitive to social conditions and needs. The university. A university is an institution of higher learning and research which grants academic degrees in diverse subjects and provides both undergraduate and postgraduate education. The word university is derived from the Latin word universitas, meaning the whole or the total. The Latin phrase for university, universitas magistrorum et scholarium, means a totality of masters and scholars. The university, thus, traditionally defined, promises to be an institution that provides universal and complete education. In the West, the earliest universities were developed under the aegis of the Catholic Church. The university was known as Studium Generale, meaning broadly a place or institute of studies where people from all parts of the world may come to study any known subject. These universities allowed entry to students from all regions, and they taught all the subjects of study that were then prevalent, such as the liberal arts, philosophy, logic, theology, mathematics, astronomy, astrology, law, grammar and rhetoric, and medicine. Teaching was done by masters. Students could choose subjects and combinations thereof that they wanted to. In that sense, the university gave an almost utopian sense of intellectual flexibility and freedom. The great universities attracted students from far and wide in their quest for knowledge. Synchronously, there were also the studia particulare, which were restricted in reach to specific areas and tended to take local students. In the modern era, when nation-states developed, many universities got established under the auspices of the state, or got funded, at least in part, by the state. The structural organization of the university shifted from student as the core to a faculty governance model. Universities, though still largely, remained independent, almost as esoteric islands in a politically live field. However, university leadership started being increasingly appointed by the state. Scientists and social scientists started experiencing dilemmas between freedom and their own ethical responsibility. Sociologist Max Weber has written at length, extremely thought-provokingly, about these dilemmas of value freedom and ideological commitment. In terms of curriculum and research areas, the early modern universities initially continued the disciplinary paradigm followed in the Middle Ages. Thereafter, humanist professors were inducted into the university faculty, and the study of language was transformed through the Studia Humanitas from emphasis on rules of grammar and rhetoric into creative writing and speaking. Classical texts were now open to translation and interpretation, and not just to be memorized and repeated. This gave further impetus to the idea of intellectual freedom that the university is founded upon. However, at the level of functioning, there have been limits to these notions of unrestricted freedom because universities are bound within demarcated physical spaces and usually, therefore, can admit only a definite number of students and faculty based on certain rational criteria. In terms of interdisciplinary engagement also, there is restricted movement because even within a particular university, there is usually strict segregation between disciplines and departments, especially between the science and the humanities streams. Organization of the university system. Most universities have a common basic pattern of organization. At the helm is the syndicate or a governing board. There is a president or a chancellor who, in the case of state-owned or funded institutions, is the head of state or province, a vice president or a vice chancellor who is a scholar of eminence and the de facto head of the university and is appointed for a specific term at the pleasure of the chancellor. In addition, there are deans of various divisions and departments. Universities are generally divided into a number of academic centers, departments, or schools or faculties. There may be a number of colleges in a university. Colleges function in coordination with the parent university. In most countries, colleges provide undergraduate and postgraduate degree or diploma programs, while research studies are conducted in the universities. There may be variations within this scheme based on a number of extraneous factors such as age of the institution, space available in terms of buildings, specialized agenda of the institution, and the source or agency of funding, etc. In a public university system, the government or government-run higher education board reviews the finances and allocates funds for each university in the system. In spite of this reliance on the government, public universities tend to enjoy a considerable degree of academic freedom. Private universities are privately funded, and while they may have certain autonomy from the state, in many cases they lack the diversity and the intellectual freedom that the public university enjoys. In India, the National Assessment and Accreditation Council, or NAAC, conducts mandatory assessment of universities, both public and private, and thus acts as a safeguard of quality, as well as brings out a standardization of curricular and pedagogic practice. There are also deemed universities, which are high-performing institutions that hold much promise. Sometimes the word varsity is used synonymously with university. The term varsity finds some prevalence in the United Kingdom and some Commonwealth countries. Dilemma between university autonomy and academic accountability. The Humboldtian model. In the 19th century, the German university pattern was developed, conceived by Wilhelm von Humboldt, and this laid stress on academic freedom, discourses and seminars, and research laboratories in universities. In contrast, the French university model was one of strict discipline and control over every aspect of the university. The idea of a university ambience in which teaching and research took place, combined with the search for objective truth, were the keynotes of the German Humboldtian model. It espoused intellectual freedom in research and teaching, university autonomy, the growth of independent disciplines with their own standards and priorities, and internationalism. Since the very beginning, universities have been international institutions. This model became popular in America and the rest of the free world from the 20th century onwards. However, though this intellectual freedom is refreshing and can lead to productive research, the construct of free intelligentsia, or the unattached intellectual, has led to serious questions about the elitism of universities. Education is not and should not be the preserve of the social elite. There was also felt a need for skill-based vocational training to be imparted through universities. Furthermore, with the increasing dominance of the free market economy and consequent economic globalization, research has become greatly aligned with market requirements. Research is encouraged and funding more readily available in those areas that stand to support certain political or economic agendas. Teaching and research are also no longer necessarily interlinked. Students too tend to view university education as a means to a market-centric, and technical and skill-based courses are emerging more popular than pure disciplinary areas. Universities have also been brought under the ambit of corporate social responsibility, and their goals are required to be in tune with the values of wider society in which they thrive. Despite the lofty ideals under which universities were conceived, they have, for the main, had to come out of their ivory towers, and the imagery of the maverick professor in the search for truth is possibly an exception rather than the rule. Evaluation. Universities provide the space for scholars and scientists to pursue knowledge, to teach and learn, and to publish their findings. In a democratic society, academics sometimes also behave as public intellectuals. They pronounce their opinion on matters of state and society, and more often than not, Their views are highly regarded. Hence, they have this immense burden of integrity and credibility. At the institutional level, all the universities enjoy a certain amount of autonomy of governance and decision making. It is also equally important that they be brought under some agency for monitoring and standardization of syllabi and educational standards. There is always a possibility that in a modern capitalist economy, curricula and research agendas could be market dominated. There is also the possibility of ideological biases. Hence, subjecting the university to public gaze and peer review is ironically in the interest of safeguarding the objectivity and integrity of the institution. Universities too have to follow the practices of social justice and equity that operate in the wider society in which they exist. In the long run, the process of review helps stimulate the academic environment for promotion of quality in teaching, learning, and research in institutions of higher education. It encourages self-evaluation, accountability, autonomy, and innovations in higher education. This ultimately benefits all stakeholders and contributes to the overall development of a nation. It also makes the educational system globally competent, competitive, and viable. So, students, let us summarize what we have learned in this module. Education is one of the most fundamental of all social institutions. Schools are the basic agency outside of the family which help in the process of socialization. As teaching institutions, both schools and universities are the creators and transmitters of intellectual tradition. It is not sufficient for an institution to fulfill its own esoteric objectives. The educational institution has to be socially sensitive and take a proactive role in serving the good of society, including the poor and the marginalized. The values enshrined in the Constitution have to be the beacon lights of any institution. It cannot be the repository of knowledge without a conscience. Teachers and students have a dual commitment to knowledge and to society. Thank you.